We'll start off with the Wikipedia page, just some basics about him. I won't go too much into his life. He spent a lot of time in Italy. He got turned down by the salon in initially in Paris and took great offense at that. And he ran the academy in Rome, and then eventually towards the end of his life, he had some success, and he ended up painting Napoleon too. So, but him and David were on the same wavelength artistically. Those slightly different styles, and they were both really opposed to Romantic way of painting and the Romantic philosophy, namely Delacroix in Rome. He was their nemesis. They didn't like him. So there was this artistic battle going on between David and Delacroix. All right, he was a French neoclassical painter. He was profoundly influenced by past artistic traditions and aspired to become the guardian of academic orthodoxy against the ascendant Romantic style. Okay, although he drew on very traditional ways of painting, he did some distortions, and he minimized color. Was not important to them, although he had a great sense of color. He just emphasized drawing lines. Color was secondary to him, and that was very different from the Romantic painters who emphasized color. And actually, you can see color was not a big of primary importance to Picasso, more so to Matisse, but not to Picasso. You look at just these almost very simplistic, childlike in Picasso use of color, and very much into design and line. And so that's one of the influences that Picasso had on Picasso. And you'll see Matisse also, the subject matter with Matisse. So anyway, it goes into all this detail about his early years, and we don't need to know all that. But like I said, he ended up in Italy, where he ran the school there, and he took on a lot of students, and he was a very good teacher, very thorough. Everybody liked him. So I'll just show some of his paintings. Let me see before we do that. Then you'll recognize some of his paintings. He was director of the French Academy in Rome. Style. He said, from the first, his paintings are characterized by a firmness of outline, reflecting his often quoted conviction that drawing is the property of art, property meaning truth. He believed color to be no more than an accessory to drawing, explaining drawing is not just reproducing contours. It is not just the line. Drawing is also the expression, the inner form, the composition, the modeling. See what is left after that. Drawing is 7/8 of what makes up painting. So very different than the Impressionists and Romantic painters' philosophy. And he spent a lot of time preparing to do a painting, doing numerous drawings, and really working on getting the drawing just right. And sometimes he would work for long years on a single painting, 10 years. He was really thorough. He used a more simple application of color, and that's one of the influence for modern art. He didn't use the conventional ways of shading or modeling, creating form through gradual transitions from bright to dark. He used more of flat tones, but you'll see they really work, and that had an impact on. Doing that had an impact on modern art. All right, it says here, although capable of painting quickly, he often labored for years over a painting. Okay, let's just look a few of him, and then I'm going to go to Wiki Art, and they have a few good comments. Let's start looking at his paintings. Go on Smart History. Portraits. He made money doing portraits, and also, but the history paintings were just his own interest. So that's this way of painting a face. I mean, there's some modeling. So, I mean, it's not that there are no shadows, but it's it's not overworked. He keeps it really simple. Even if you look at the hand, right? It's not just very fine shadows, barely suggested. Okay? And same thing with the not going into too much detail with the coat, but really, really capturing the person, I think.
This is Ingres, did you say?
Pardon?
Is this Ingres?
This is on, yeah, yes, yeah. Hi, this is his most famous portrait de Monsieur Bertin, and it's at the Louvre. And it's this influenced Picasso in his, you'll see in a minute, his painting of Gertrude Stein, which you probably have seen. But this is a magnificent painting. I mean, this guy's character, strength of character, and his pose, and
The lighting is fantastic on his face.
yeah, it is. And the golden light in the back, and but he really did. I mean, the way he created the contours of the face, he really just simplified the transitions.
And the way he let the hair be messy.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. I like that too. But you know, he's standing there with that posture is like, and his big barrel chest and everything. Yeah, this is a magnificent thing. Now I was talking back to the Renaissance, early Renaissance, and the Madonnas, the way he painted the face. I mean, just completely simplified it. Rothschild, the famous Rothschilds, the Baron, portrait Baron de Rothschild. It's in the Rothschild collection.
She was very pretty.
Yeah, and wealthy.
That dress is gorgeous.
I know,
Yeah.
it's not shabby.
No. And I think Sargent must have been influenced by him. And you remember we covered Sargent. He was painting women in elegant dresses, and just with a spontaneity about it, and not over laboring. And I think that's what Ingres is doing here. He's got it. He's captured it, but he didn't overwork it. And there's a spontaneous sense of brushwork, although he hides his brushwork, unlike Sargent shows it more. But I mean, she really, as a person, as a human being, she really comes through in this. And he's known for his drawings, his female nudes. You see, he was at some point he was selling drawings to British tourists because he had a patch there where he was there wasn't any money coming in. And those drawings apparently are some of his best work. Maybe this is one of them. The Turkish baths, and that Matisse did numerous Turkish baths, and I think he was picking up on what I did. Okay, there's the Picasso painting. Should I go back to the other one? This was a breakthrough, this painting. He had her sit, Picasso had her sit for hours and hours and hours, and he wasn't happy with it. They kept painting out the face, and then without her there, he ended up doing this. But this was a pre-cubist portrait, but the very little modeling or transitions in the face and hands. Very simply put. Let me go back to this one.
I don't see what you're talking about with the simplicity and then the lack of shadows.
There is some shadows, but it's minimal compared to the more traditional way of doing portrait. All right. He minimizes it. He's using more flatter areas of color.
So what do you mean by that, Joe? Flatter areas of color?
Yes, look at Picasso's face here. I'll go back to it. But he's got some shadows here, right? But it's reduced to like maybe 3 transition zones. It's not, this is more modern. In other words, it's not going for a realistic portrayal of the face or the way of painting it. It's kind
Yeah,
of
it
it's
looks,
like a mask. It's almost like a mask. It's like he's trying to get at her soul and get past the the facial features that we see at first sight. What were you gonna say?
and I said it's very angular.
An angular, yeah, and like masks are, like African masks are. But I'm just saying, Picasso took Ingres, what Ingres doing, and carried it further. And took
I
it
can
there.
see a relationship between the Turkish bath and some of Picasso's later paintings and even Matisse's, because in the middle of that painting is a body that is kind of almost disembodied.
Right. Again, simplify transitions and creating contour. Same there. But he's still, by doing that, he's still capturing her, you know. This wash of light over her flesh. No art.
Who are these by? I can't see the name.
They're all by him. They're all by Ingres. That's who we're covering. All
Oh,
these-
okay.
I'm
Well,
on
you
Wik-
Picasso. So I didn't
I'm
know
on
what-
Wikipedia, and we're looking at Ingres paintings that are on the Wikipedia page. All right, just an introduction to him. I go to Wiki Art. As a budding artist, he was able to observe the many examples of famous artworks of Belgium, Holland, and Spain, which had been looted during the exploits of Napoleon and were held at the Louvre. He freely borrowed from their classical interpretation and used the techniques in his own art, leading to many critics to accuse him of plundering the past. It was in this vein that his first submission to the Salon were received very poorly. Ingres' humiliation was so deep that he vowed never to return to Paris. Throughout his early art career, his painting style, which emphasized the purity of color and did not employ the gradual shifting of color and shading as in Romantic paintings, led to many bad reviews. But ironically, it was only the Romantic artists whom he so hated that recognized and appreciated his talents. All right, we'll come back here.
And the correct pronunciation is Ingres, is that right?
Yeah, there's different pronunciations. This one, it's a tough one. It's a tongue twister. Ung or ang. Maybe Mariah would be able to tell us for sure.
We're in the Louvre looking at a painting by Ingres called The Grand Odalisque.
Odalisque simply means a woman in a harem.
But the Western conception of what a harem was versus what a harem actually was are two very different things.
And Ingres never went to the Near East or North Africa, so this isn't based on observation. This is entirely a Western fantasy.
What we're seeing is this languid, nude woman whose back is turned to us, and yet whose body is flexible enough for her head to turn back and look directly at us with a slight slightly coy eye.
but also with a sense of reserve and distance. And so I think that's one of the tensions here is this beautiful female nude, but also the unavailability of her body and the slightly cold or distant gaze.
Also the coolness of the coloration and the perfection of the surface of the canvas. There is not a brushstroke to be seen. She seems unavailable because the hand of the artist is completely absent.
Now, the subject of the female nude goes back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, through the Renaissance with artists like Titian and Giorgione. But here in the 19th century in France, when artists painted the female nude, they continued that tradition of painting ancient Greek goddesses or mythological figures. And it was important for the nude to be distanced. In other words, not a contemporary nude figure, but distanced by time, that classical figure.
This figure, however, is distanced by geography.
I think it's important to remember that Napoleon, only years before, was in North Africa and the Near East. And so although this was distant geographically to people in France, it was also exotic, and there was a real curiosity about these cultures.
Somebody has their mic on. Could you please mute your mic?
Joe, the sound is weird.
It is? Really?
Yes, yeah. Trust me, weird.
What is it like?
It was echoing.
All right, it's breaking up.
Although we
and
don't
it was
see
very
anything.
interesting. Yeah.
Joe, it's echoing. It's saying the same thing with an echo. So
Okay.
whatever is playing is
Right.
echoing itself. So do you have two sound sources on, like your phone near your?
No, I don't. Hold on. Let me like close it and then open it up to this point, 152. Let me just close it. and open it.
Sorry.
Sometimes that helps. All right. Let me close my browser and then just reopen it. Sometimes that solves the problem. Oh, I got it. Maybe I got too many copies of that. That could be. That could be. All right. Was it doing it that whole time? The whole.
Yes, Joe, it was doing it the whole time.
And it's doing it again, and with your voice is echoing.
Oh, actually, it wasn't doing it when the music was playing. It was doing it when the people's.
We're in the Louvre looking at a painting by Ingres called the
How about now?
No,
No, it's not echoing.
not while the guy's speaking.
Grand Odalisque.
Odalisque simply means a woman in a harem.
But the Western conception of what a harem was versus what a harem actually was are two very different things.
And Ingres never went to the Near East or North Africa, so this isn't based on observation. This is entirely a Western fantasy.
Darn.
What we're seeing is this languid nude woman whose back is turned to us.
I have this white thing blocking the screen. All right, come on, stop that.
And yet whose body is flexible enough for her head to turn back and look directly at us with a slightly coy eye.
But also with a sense of reserve and distance. And so I think that's one of the tensions here is this beautiful female nude, but also the unavailability of her body and the slightly cold or distant gaze.
Also the coolness of the coloration and the perfection of the surface of the canvas. There is not a brushstroke to be seen. She seems unavailable because the hand of the artist is completely absent.
Now, the subject of the female nude goes back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, through the Renaissance with artists like Titian and Giorgione. But here in the 19th century in France, when artists painted the female nude, they continued that tradition of painting ancient Greek goddesses or mythological figures. And it was important for the nude to be distanced. In other words, not a contemporary nude figure, but distanced by time, that classical figure.
This figure, however, is distanced by geography.
I think it's important to remember that Napoleon, only years before, was in North Africa and the Near East. And so although this was distant geographically to people in France, it was also exotic, and there was a real curiosity about these cultures.
Although we don't see anything authentic here.
Ingres emerges from this neoclassical tradition of David.
He was David's most famous student.
And so part of the lack of any visible brushstrokes, the emphasis on line and contour, these are all things that are part of that neoclassical tradition.
But he's willing to distort the body much more than David ever was. In fact, her body seems impossible. Her back is simply too long, as if there are extra vertebrae. Her left leg, where would it attach to her thigh?
Even her left calf is way too long, and one part doesn't seem to attach to another. And yet we don't notice those things when we first approach this painting, which I think speaks to Ingres' goal, which was to create something that was ideal and beautiful. And that naturalism, that illusion of reality in terms of anatomy, wasn't as important.
Don't make the mistake that Ingres didn't understand human anatomy. These were distortions that were quite purposeful.
The nude is surrounded by this lush environment of embroidered satins and silks and jewels and pearls and that peacock feathered fan that brushes against her thigh. In a way, it seems to me that there's a coolness about her, but a sensuality in her surroundings.
This is a painting that really is a tease. It is luxurious in every way, from the pipe on the right to the satins to the silkiness of her skin. And yet the figure and the location are completely unavailable to the viewer. She's both present and absent in a way.
I'm noticing the way that that left elbow presses into that pillow, giving us a sense of the weight of her body and that lovely turban and jewels around her head.
Look at the composition. Look at the way that the turn of her nose leads into her shoulder, runs down the curve of her right arm, and is picked up by the curtain that loops back up, creating a kind of continuous inverse arc.
It is those lovely shapes that make one forget about those anatomical inaccuracies. It is the ideal beauty that Ingres has presented us with here.
And it's because of that that this painting and Ingres' career in general is often seen as a hinge between the neoclassical and romanticism.
Distortions were picked up by Matisse and Picasso and others. Let's see there. I got the right one.
In the Robert Lehman collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and one of the most wonderful places to see art in New York.
One can imagine oneself as a collector.
Well, it is a kind of representation of his domestic environment where he put his painting collection.
That's right.
And we're standing in front of one of the real masterpieces in New York, and certainly of this collection, by Jean-Auguste-Dominique Ingres. And it's a painting that's called The Princess de Broglie, and it dates to about 1853. It's very late for Ingres.
It is.
It's, in fact, I think it's his last society portrait, and it's one of his most important and one of his most beautiful, I think.
When I look at this, I feel like it's almost impossible to believe that this was made by hand. In the era of Photoshop, first of all, you can't see any brushwork. There's a total perfection to the surface.
So let's take a look.
Okay.
One of the most striking aspects of the painting, for my eyes, is that cool, icy blue dress. The textures of the satin are so brilliantly rendered that you get this sense that I could almost hear it as the cloth pulls against itself.
Or if she were to move and walk, we could hear what that sounds like as it rustled.
And it almost feels like she is moving a little bit.
She's amazingly alive.
What I think Ang is up to some extent, is contrasting the clarity and precision of that cloth against the softness of the skin, which has a kind of indeterminance.
In a very characteristic Ang way, there's something a little bit funny about the body and something a little bit funny about the way that the flesh is modeled. If you look at her left forearm, there should be more modeling there to indicate the arm's three-dimensionality.
And there's no musculature.
Right, there's no musculature, there's no sense of bone.
No
and muscle,
definition.
right.
Yeah.
At first, when you look at the painting, there's no sense of this, but when you start to really look more closely, there's something dislocated about the upper part of the arm from the forearm. arm.
And from
something
the
very
shoulder,
and from the
yes.
shoulder, something very elongated about the wrist. And even though Ang is so amazing in terms of
He's a
being
master
craftsman,
of anatomy.
right?
Yes.
He's really decided to take some liberties here in the pursuit, perhaps, of some sort of ideal of perfection and beauty.
So that's interesting. That body doesn't have to be in any other position. So he can actually idealize this particular position by very deftly and very subtly transforming her skeletal structure, really. Look at the length of the neck, for instance, right? I mean, it's just a little bit longer than one would expect. Her face is beautiful, but her eyes are just a little larger than we would expect. And she gazes out with a kind of intensity, a kind of forlorn, poetic quality that speaks to her aristocratic position, because she doesn't look at us, I don't think. I think she almost looks past us.
Or maybe a little down at us. I don't know.
Perhaps even that, yeah.
That's interesting how initially the first viewer, you don't notice these anatomical distortions.
It looks like he's got a broken left wrist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
A Conley's fracture.
Yeah. And they're, you're captured by, at least I am captured by the gown and just the perfection of their flesh tone. And I guess he wants you to overlook that, or just elongation of the body. I mean, well, Greco did that. Others in the Renaissance did that, and I guess I would call it some idealized form. I don't know why that makes it more idealized to elongate, but well, I think what's interesting with him is that it doesn't capture. It's not the first thing that you notice. If it was a lesser artist, you would say, "Oh, he doesn't know how to." Doesn't understand human anatomy. He's got the drawing wrong, but he did. But he didn't. There's comments by him where he disparages the whole study of anatomy, and it's not important. It's not the most important thing. It's yet while at the same time emphasizing the importance of drawing. So, so let's go back to look at more of his paintings with the art. Okay, I went off there. So just keeping all that in mind, his distortions, his perfection of brushstroke, you don't see it, minimizing transitions from dark to light. Napoleon, he and David, Napoleon kept the two of them busy. Self-portrait. I think drawing on that tradition, Rembrandt standing in front of his easel, others as a young man getting, stating his career. But that's interesting. He's erasing. And I think he's working on a drawing, not a painting, and that fit into his philosophy. Ah, that was a preliminary study. Okay, that was stage one. Yeah, it's 24 there. How about distortion? It looks like he's introducing surrealism to the world there.
Is she Chinese or something? Or
No, just Mademoiselle Revere, French. And
Huh.
he did this in 1805. He was 25 when he did this.
She definitely looks Asian.
Yeah.
I had to look up Jane Austen as you were showing this because I thought they're the same time, and they are.
Hmm.
With the pictures, I'm watching something on PBS called Sandington about that period of time, and he's really captured the clothing, that the neck stuff and all. It's really cool. They lived at the same time, but he lived longer.
This is the same woman that looked Asian. It's another portrait of her. That arm, look at her right arm. Look how long it is. It's way too long. It should probably end here.
I'm thinking he does the draping and the fan to cover up his mistakes.
Nice, did it intentionally. These distortions.
Why would he do that?
What do you think? I mean, I can have some guesses. Why do you think you might do it?
I think it's the artist interpretation, and that's the look that he wants. So that's why he did that. Because obviously it's very clear. He's very well depicted the fabrics and the dress and the ornamentation and the detailing on the shawl, which is really detailed. It's intricate. And even though if you see her hands, the fingers are shown properly. So it's not that he's trying to cover something, you know? That's how I feel.
It's like he seems
That's
to
style.
either exact with arms and legs. He just has a propensity to distort them and make them longer or shorter. I'm not sure exactly why, but overall it works. I think it still works.
Yeah, but he puts so much thought into doing that. I mean, you know, if it's not a mistake, it's just kind of like a waste of time. It's so interesting.
All right.
He can pull it off, but so what?
Well, yeah, you could say that, but in other words, why not just do it realistically?
But not so much, but why do it that way?
Yeah.
So it's so totally curious. Yeah.
Here's this one of those famous paintings of Napoleon. It's actually humorous. It's so ridiculously pompous. I'm sure Napoleon liked that, but it's actually incredible. Reminds me a little of John Von Eyck. It's the detail work and
Really beautiful, the colors and the contrast with the white and the red and the gold.
that carpet. Look at that carpet. Yeah. Looks like he got his anatomy correct in terms of arm length. Yeah. I guess he had to for Napoleon. Could have had his head cut off. He got it wrong. Some of his drawings. Yeah, these are correct. So you can see he knows how to do it. He knows how to draw the human body if you want to do it correctly. It does seem to be like someone out of the Renaissance. He just like leap forward from 1500s to the 1800s. This is amazing, the flesh tone here.
It looks like he has eaten a sour apple.
This guy. Yeah, right. So,
Sour apple face.
you ever hear
But
the,
look at that red color.
you hear the phrase "weaned on a pickle"?
I had not.
Somebody with a perpetually sour face. He or she looks like she was weaned on a pickle.
Was that a southern?
I heard it from somebody locally. It's really stuck in my mind. So,
Hmm.
Wow,
yeah,
that's a dark one.
yeah, it's really modern too. It's this um patch of black without going into any detail on the hair and just yep.
Is that a hat or his hair?
It's hair. I don't see a hat. It's all his hair.
Look at those eyes. They're so dark.
Yeah, really intense.
Amazing.
Almost looks
Is
like that. Almost
here?
looks like Elvis Presley, doesn't it? With the long sideburns in the hair. Paul Lemoyne.
Mhm.
That last guy looked fat and happy, very self-satisfied.
He did, didn't he?
Well, he certainly knows what to do with faces, doesn't he? He captures a lot of interesting expressions.
Mm.
What's that?
And this is talk about distortion. Look at her arm. It's ridiculous. There's more information in one of the things I'm going to show.
That
About.
must be Zeus. That's Zeus or
Different-
Neptune. But
Yeah.
the head is small. The head of the nymph or whatever it was.
I know.
Hera. Who
Yeah.
is that?
Thetis. Yeah.
Thetis.
Thetis, yeah. So she's employing him for some reason, and he's impassive, barely notices her. But yeah, that arm is ridiculously her left
I
arm.
think there was a battle between the gods and one was eating another's children or something, and I think she might be begging to save her children, I think, but I can't remember exactly.
I'm gonna move up to some of his. So he, I mean, he looks like he was getting quite a few commissions by the royalty, or I mean, to get for Napoleon to ask you to do his portrait, he was up there. This is one of his history paintings, very congested, complicated composition.
It's hard to read what it says. It says Romulus
Victory over
over who?
Akron, Acron. So it's probably one of the early Roman history.
Mm.
The Dream of Ossian. Sounds like a Norse myth. That could be Greek. Looks like Greek. The Psalms of Ossian. Oh, Caroline Murat, Queen of Naples. That's powerful.
Mm.
That Etna
Huh, Raphael. That's playing with Raphael. It's portraits. The Grand Odalisque. Sistine Chapel. Oh. His wife. I think he was married twice. His first wife died. Right. Henry IV receiving the ambassador of Spain. Okay.
I found out who Thetis was, if you're interested.
Yeah.
So she is the daughter of Nereus and Doris. She was a sea nymph, a goddess of water, and one of 50 Nereids, daughters of the ancient sea god Nereus. And she was married to, in the Trojan War, the wedding of Thetis and the Greek hero Peleus is one of the precipitating events in the war, which also led to the birth of their child, Achilles. So. It says that she probably played a more central role in the religious beliefs and practices of archaic Greek. The pre-modern etymology of her name, from Tatemi to set up, established, suggests a perception among classic Greeks of an early political role. In the Iliad, Achilles recalls to his mother her role in defending and thus legitimizing the reign of Zeus against an incipient rebellion by 3 Olympians, each of whom has pre-Olympian roots. Okay, that's enough.
He could certainly capture the individual, and the psychology, stuff about her personality. It really comes to life. Their availability, even their social status, you get a sense where they stand in society, their dress and the expression on their face. The women tend to look more friendly and accessible than the men. I think this guy looks pretty friendly, yeah. Monsieur Leblanc. All right, this is one of his famous paintings. Actually, he got help him restore his reputation. I think it was accepted by the Salon to view the vow of Louis XIII. But it is so Renaissance-y. He had to be a famous Renaissance painter reincarnated in France. Just continues, modernizing his work, but harking back to it. All right, there's a all right, so there's a couple brief videos here about him. Once we'll save how if you want to watch the whole thing, we'll see how it goes. It's a 2-part thing. I would like to show the Ukraine. I don't know if I can do all of it.
Hello and welcome back. This is Molly in Home with Art 318, and today we're going to be looking at Ingres, Jean-Auguste-Dominique Ingres, or sometimes it's pronounced Ang, sometimes Ingres, depending on who's talking, so I'll do my best. Anyways, Ingres was born in 1780. He is one of the most famous students to come out of the studio of the neoclassical artist Jacques-Louis David, and he is probably the last great neoclassical painter that we'll be looking at anyways in this class. He's often set in juxtaposition to Eugène Delacroix in order to contrast the romanticism of Delacroix against the neoclassicism of Ingres. However,
Yeah, look at how the faces are painted differently. Look how there's less transition, definitely less transition from light to shade in Ingres' face portrait than this one.
So right when Delacroix,
Right one's Delacroix. Yeah. This is just like a wash of light over it. Here he's trying to get all the various peaks and valleys of his face and dark patches, areas, and lines. More grays, gray colors, various colors of red. Yeah.
to me, Delacroix looks more human, this painting.
Yeah, I think you're right.
he wasn't always really held to be the ideal of neoclassical refinement during his own time. And you might also be wondering, hey, we just got done with neoclassicism, we just got into romanticism, so now that we're fully into this romantic period, looking at all these different artists who seem to be pushing art forward, why then are we going back to look at another neoclassical artist? And there's a couple reasons. One is that Ingres wasn't necessarily just another quote-unquote neoclassical artist. He does some things a little bit different. It also serves as a nice reminder that one movement doesn't simply fade away just because another one, Romanticism, becomes more popular. Instead, there's a competition as well as a dialogue between the various art movements, whether it's two like we see here, neoclassicism and romantic, or a little bit more complex, which we'll see moving forward. The art movements themselves will influence one another, as well as larger social, political, economic events, so all of that's mixed together, and it's not always quite so easy to simply define one artist as neoclassical and one artist as romantic. Even with such iconic figures as Delacroix and Ingres, we can still find ways in which there's a hint of neoclassicism in some of the themes that Delacroix paints, and there's a hint of romanticism in some of the themes which Ingres portrays. So let's turn back to Ingres with a quick overview of his biography. Jean-Auguste-Dominique Ingres was born in 1780 in Montauban, which is in southern France. He was the oldest of 7 children. His father was an artist and musician, not a famous painter, mind you, but an artisan.
By the way, Ingres was a pretty good violinist and played in orchestras. It was like a second career he had.
Who worked in multiple trades. He painted, he did stonework, he sculpted. And so Ingres was born in this artistic environment, and this represents his earliest exposure to both painting and music. A little side note, Ingres was also a very talented violinist, so much so that there's a phrase, Ingres violin, and it refers to a person who is extremely famous or well known for a specific skill, but is also extremely adept at doing something else. And so, Ingres' hidden talent was his mastery of the violin, hence the phrase Ingres violin. His earliest studies were at a religious academy, which was disrupted in the years of the French Revolution, as many such institutions were closed during this time. So in 1791, his father took him to Toulouse, where he enrolled in the Royal Academy of Painting, Sculpture, and Architecture, and his formal training in the arts truly began. He was there for a few years, and then 1797, he moves to Paris. In Paris, he continues his studies, now at the Royal Academy in Paris, and amongst the many masters that he trains with, he also enters the studio of Jacques-Louis David. This is a key turning point for Ingres, and it's not too long, just 4 years later, Ingres will win the Prix de Rome. So it's 1801, Ingres starts packing his bags, getting ready for his Prix de Rome trip, and then what happens?
Prix de Rome was to get a year in Rome, all expense paid.
Well, he has to put things on hold. The turmoil in the wake of the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon made it not a great time to travel to Rome for the artist, and so it's not until 1806 that he will depart for Rome. In the meantime, he continues to work and study in Paris, and we'll look at a portrait he does during this time before he departs. When he does finally get to Rome, he will be required to do all of the things that David had to do. He's still studying, he's still having to produce certain works with certain themes and send them back for the approval of the Academy of his progress. We'll see how well that works out. And when he's there, he might be influenced by some of the same names we're used to hearing, such as Caravaggio or Michelangelo, and most of all Raphael, but he's also very influenced by an artist whose name we haven't heard before, and that's the Italian painter Bronzino. Bronzino was a 16th century Italian manners painter, best known for his highly stylized, elegant, and slightly affected style of portraiture. Ingres will come across his work during his years in Italy, and likewise, Ingres will also be widely known for his highly stylized, elegant, and slightly affected style of portraiture. So let's take a look at some of those portraits, and we'll start with the portrait of Napoleon on his imperial throne. And this portrait we first saw in the article Portraits of Napoleon, and it really stood out from the rest. Not only did it show him seated, authoritarian, in a very formal pose, as opposed to the more active, engaging, heroic images of Napoleon as the general, this is very much a royal portrait, and now we have Napoleon as emperor, and everything about this portrait exemplifies that. It's very similar in many ways to the portrait of King Louis XIV. He's wearing coronation robes, which are now red and gold instead of blue and gold because it's the Bonapartes who are in charge now. The B replaces the fleur-de-lis. We also have him holding two different rods. The one with the figure on top is thought by many to represent Charlemagne, so he's linking his rule with the rule of the great ruler Charlemagne in the past. We also saw Charlemagne's name engraved on those stones at the feet of the horse in Napoleon crossing the Alps. And on the other side we see a replica of Charlemagne's sword. On that side we see another rod. It's quite curious. It has a little ivory hand at the top. That's a medieval symbol of his rule. Around his head there is a golden laurel wreath. At his feet a great eagle with his wings outstretched. Both of those symbolize the rulers of ancient Rome. Around his neck he wears the Legion of Honor, and then the splendid chair almost becomes a halo behind his head. And that is a reference probably to Jan van Eyck. Who's Jan van Eyck? The best painter in the world. He was the famous early Netherlandish painter who painted the Ghent altarpiece, and at this time it was one of the many treasures that Napoleon brought back to him to France. And so when Napoleon ventured out with his soldiers, he often brought back the spoils of his victories, and that was anything from the Ghent altarpiece to the Rosetta Stone. So that striking
But we can't see
linearity,
the
which is
top.
characteristic of Jan van Eyck, might have been an
Somebody say something?
Yeah, we can't see the top of these paintings. We
Ah.
see the stuff underneath the video forward button, but we can't see the paintings.
I
Yeah.
thought that's why I was supposed, that there was no choice in that, and it was my fault. I didn't have it scrolled down enough. Okay, here we go.
important influence to Ingres. Because if we thought David had a striking linearity to his style and super smooth glossy surfaces, Ingres surpasses even that. And those jewel-like surfaces of Jan van Eyck's paintings from that earlier period with the absolutely crisp, precise linearity of style could be one of those ingredients to what make Ingres' paintings distinctive from that of his predecessors, because this was a new influence. Remember, it came with Napoleon, so it's something that's just coming in now, and it's something that they're going to be seeing now that's different, because it's not down there in Rome that all the Prix de Rome winners are seeing. It's something that came from the north. Before we move on from this portrait of Napoleon, instead of just breaking down the symbolism, let's look at the overall style. And even in that, it's quite different from those portraits by David or Gros, another student of David, in that article we looked at. Both of those are very active, there's a strong naturalism to the figure, and here it seems so frozen. And if we look at the shapes, think of the underdrawing, it's very geometric in its form. The round circle of the seat, the squareness of the shoulders, the geometry is emphasized, and so he's really almost subverting the naturalness of the human figure in order to create a stoic, authoritarian style of portrait. This is something I think that is a key to understanding the uniqueness of Ingres' style, that he manipulates and distorts the human figure just enough in order to emphasize the ideas that he's trying to conjure, whether it's the sensuality of the female nude or the authoritarian demeanor of the ruler, from Napoleon to Zeus. So let's move on and look at another example. Looking at Ingres' paintings from this period, we see early on that there's a very specific difference between how Ingres paints and how his predecessor David paints, especially when we look at the human figure. This example here that we see with Oedipus and the Sphinx was a painting that Ingres performed for a specific task. One of the many things he had to send back to the Academy was a study of the male nude. However, he could put it into a narrative form, which he does here, but the primary objective of this painting is to show the Academy his progress as a student in depicting the male form. Unfortunately, they weren't super impressed. There seemed to be a lot of weird things going on with the figure, and the longer you look at the figure of Oedipus, the more things seem to go awry. There's a strange weightlessness to the figure. He's not really conforming to the laws of gravity. It's very elegant. It's almost attenuated in some places. The arc of the back is just a little too perfectly round. Some of those distortions that become the classic trademark of Ingres are already present here. And if we contrast it quickly against a work by Jacques-Louis David when he was a student and he had to submit a figure of the male nude, we see he's sticking to the classics. This very much seems to be based on the Dying Gaul statue, another one of the works from classical antiquity that was held in high esteem. The juxtaposition of these two paintings shows not a different skill level, but a different objective of the two artists. Let's move on. This painting, titled Jupiter and Thetis from 1811, exemplifies a common idea associated with Ingres, and that's his tendency to make these archetype figures, the sensuous female and the stoic male, and you couldn't emphasize that more here. This is another story from the Iliad, and here we see the nymph, the beautiful, sensuous nymph Thetis, begging for the stoic, all-powerful Zeus, king of the gods, to intervene on the behalf of the life of her son. She is all supplication, and he remains emotionless. Just like Napoleon, he is geometric. The line of his shoulders couldn't be straighter. He's almost like a big box, and the line of her body is this long, sinuous form, almost this S-curve coming down, cascading down the canvas. So he's really juxtaposing these very two different ideas. Yes, there is a very specific idea of the strength of the men and the sensuality of the female, and it's these archetypes of the characters from the Iliad, and also perhaps reflective of values of men and women gender roles in France at that time, but also it's this idea that underlies a lot of Ingres' paintings in which he exaggerates these aspects of the human figure in order to create these ideas or idealized ideas of these different archetype characters. And this painting, Le Grand Odalisque by Ingres, is perhaps the most famous example of this tendency of the artist's style. We'll take a closer look at this painting in part 2.
All right, that was pretty good. We got time. I'll do part 2. It's not that. It's just 13 minutes, 15 minutes, but she's good.
Hello and welcome back to our continued discussion on the painter Ingres. In the first half, we looked at a selection of paintings from Napoleon to the Oedipus to Jupiter and Thetis. And I want to just remind you that all of these were done while...
I don't know why my computer's doing this, but just black.
It's giving us flashcards, Jim.
Technically, Ingres was still studying with the Royal Academy. He had won the Prix de Rome in 1801, but was unable to travel to Rome until 1806, and once there, he would actually continue to stay far beyond the period of his study. Part of the reason was the reception of his works back in Paris. They found his work a bit strange. It was too linear, too concise, too frozen. His portrait of Napoleon was criticized as Gothic. He showed too much favor to that northern style, and not enough reverence or looking back in his own style back to the Italian manner, which was so dominant in the academic tradition. He goes to Rome in 1806, and while there, the influence of the Italians does become an important aspect of his style. Most importantly, it's Raphael and the Mannerist Bronzino. So with Raphael, we think back to his style with the beautiful but idealized and slightly geometric forms of his portraits of the Madonna. And with Bronzino, the Mannerist, we think of that slightly elongated, very elegant, but also almost posturing, almost artificial, and itself almost a kind of frozen style, especially in the secular work associated with Mannerism, the portraiture. And while we certainly can't reduce it to some magical mathematical formula where Raphael plus Bronzino plus Jan van Eyck equals Ingres, ta-da, but we do see elements of those earlier artists manifest in Ingres style from this earlier period and even in his later works. So he's sending back the Oedipus and the Sphinx and the Bather as examples of his progress while he's in Rome back up to the Academy, and they're continuously not received well. They're very much criticized. They are continuing to be critiqued as not well modeled, the line is too harsh, and there's just something inorganic or maybe too organic about the figures. They just somehow don't resolve. And his Jupiter and Thetis of 1811, which was the magnus opus of his academic training, was yet again received with disdain. However, in contrast to the criticism he receives in Paris, he is building his reputation in Rome. He is finding clients, he is becoming well known, and securing a reputation with portraits like this. And so he stays. He continues to work in Rome until 1820. Unfortunately, just as it seemed like Ingres was finding success, external events intrude. With the fall of Napoleon, many of the French, who happened also to be his patrons, left Rome, and so the cash flow stops. He's no longer getting commissions for history-style paintings or expensive oil paintings, and so instead he relies on his skills as a draftsman and produces a lot of drawn portraits. A lot of these are for English tourists who come to Italy, and many of these, such as the example here, lead to speculation about him using drawing devices because they're so well articulated, so concise, and were produced pretty rapidly. We'll get to that in the lecture on photography. Ingres himself did not want to build his reputation as a portrait painter, as we've discussed other artists wanting to achieve that level of history painting in the past. That's still his ultimate goal. But it is the portraits, such as these, for which he is largely known today. But now let's turn to his most famous painting, one that was commissioned before the fall of Napoleon, which was commissioned by Napoleon's sister for her husband. She happened to be queen, and he happened to be king of Naples. But in 1814, Napoleon was deposed and sent into exile twice, meaning that Caroline and her husband would also lose power, meaning that this painting no longer had a home, and so in 1819 it was shown at the Paris Salon. Both scandalous and evocative, Ingres' Grand Odalisque turned quite a few heads that year at the Salon, and it was, along with Géricault's Raft of the Medusa, among the most groundbreaking and talked about paintings at that year's event. Since then, despite the numerous portraits and history paintings painted by Ingres, the theme of the odalisque in 19th century painting is nearly synonymous with his name. The Grand Odalisque, painted in 1814, has become the textbook image for Ingres. If you've taken a class where you even have a cursory look at this period in art history, you've probably seen this painting. It is considered a landmark, and it is considered an example of the Orientalist spirit of the Romantic period. We also see the idea of Orientalism discussed in the painting by Gros of Napoleon visiting his troops in Jaffa, because, like this painting, it conjured imagery for the eyes of the viewers in Paris of what the Middle East looked like. So why did this become so popular? Well, part of it was because of Napoleon and because of his campaigns beyond Europe. But the ideas of an exotic far-off land, the Near East, infiltrated Europe in more than one way. A very famous example were the writings Letters from Turkey by the wife of a British ambassador, Lady Montagu. Her writings, in which she describes the journey through the Middle East, the traditions, the religions, the way of life, conjured notions of this far-off land to the Europeans. And though her writings were considered more accurate than earlier descriptions, she was still describing this region from an outsider's perspective, and it was but one of many ingredients, sort of like the excavation at Pompeii was one of many ingredients that added to the revitalization of classicism. So it's through these different avenues that Orientalism is a strong undercurrent of the early Romantic period. But we also have to remember that Ingres wasn't just in his studio whipping up exotic scenes of an Orient he had never been to. Instead, this painting, the Grand Odalisque, was a commissioned work. It was specifically sought from the Queen of Naples for her husband, the King, and, by the way, the Queen of Naples was also Napoleon's little sister. Caroline Bonaparte Murat and her husband Joachim ruled Naples from 1808 to 1814. During this time, Caroline established herself with quite the reputation as a patron for the arts. Some describe her as trying to remake her image as a modern-day Marie de Medici. She commissioned works from both French and Italian artists, including Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun, Antonio Canova, the great sculptor, and for our purposes here, Ingres, and, more to the point, the Grand Odalisque. Ingres' painting of Le Grand Odalisque is often heralded as a inventive new genre for the female nude. So we're no longer limited to just portraying Venus or beautiful nymphs in the nude from Greek mythology, but now we have a whole new category. Well, yes and no. It is new in that it really jump-starts this category and it makes it very popular, and over time Ingres will begin to paint several more of these, and then a few decades later it'll be revived again in the hands of the early modern artist. However, it is not entirely without precedent. We can look to specific influences of Ingres in this composition. First, we want to remember that this was commissioned by Caroline Bonaparte. Why is this important? Well, we can look at another work that was commissioned by another one of Napoleon's sisters, Pauline, and note it's actually quite similar, only she has herself portrayed as Venus victorious, so a little bit of a scandal here. The emperor's little sister has herself portrayed in the guise of Venus and a reclining nude. Only Pauline could have pulled that off. Another precedent for Ingres' paintings wasn't a female nude, but if you look at the position of Madame Récamier in this portrait by Jacques-Louis David in 1800, it is strikingly similar to the posture of Le Grand Odalisque by Ingres 14 years later. So in 1800, Ingres was still in France, David was his mentor. Ingres undoubtedly saw this painting. So maybe it's been lurking in his mind, who knows, but he's obviously taking this basic composition and playing with it, and he really amps up the sensuality. Obviously, she's now a nude, and we'll look at the distortions of the figure. But before we do, one last precedent, and that's much earlier. It's a Rococo painting. Actually, a few different paintings, although we're only going to look at one, and it's the Brunette Odalisque by Francois Boucher. So Boucher actually did a few different versions of the Odalisque, the Blonde Odalisque, the Brunette Odalisque. In some of them, it's believed that his wife served as the model of the Odalisque. In others, King Louis XV's mistress as the model for the Odalisque. But there were a few different paintings. These were all private commissions originally, but some of them were shown at later salons. And in fact, in 1767, the Brunette Odalisque was shown publicly, much to the horror of Denis Diderot. You'll remember he was one of those neoclassical philosophers, the philosophes, that we talked about. Sometimes when I first show this painting, I ask everyone, what do they think? And do they think he's very skilled? Do they think this is a choice? Or do they think that this is the best he can do? And invariably, answers come from both sides. But I'm going to argue that it is very much an intentional choice made by Ingres, he's purposefully elongating and stylizing the human figure. I think one of my favorite quotes actually comes from one of my students who pointed out that Ingres disregarded the limits of the human body in order to serve the needs of the composition. And I thought, that's just perfect. He was actually criticized for this painting. One critic famously claimed that she had 3 extra vertebrae. That's the only way her back could stretch so long. But for Ingres, it didn't matter vertebrae, +3, -3, whatever. He wants this long, serpentine, sensual back that she can twist and turn and look around back at the viewer. He's not concerned with reality. He's concerned with creating this idea. And again, this notion of this archetype in which it's idealized. When something's idealized, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's realistic. In fact, it's usually not. And so the idealized, beautiful odalisque here has this impossibly long back, and then her legs swell up just to get that beautiful, graceful curve. And then her feet are impossibly small, actually, for this odalisque. So while some of the fictions Ingres creates are quite obvious, like her long back and those extra vertebrae, others are more subtle, and the subject he popularized, an exotic fantasy of an odalisque, or a harem girl, effectively combined the tradition of a reclining nude Venus, which was first brought to us by the great Venetian painter Titian, and he combines it with the notion of a trony, which is simply a portrait of an imaginary person or type. The most famous example of the trony genre is certainly Vermeer's Girl with the Pearl Earring from 1665. Back to the Grand Odalisque, what we essentially have is an anonymous young European model. She's given a few props, and voila, she becomes Le Grand Odalisque. Once a gift between an amorous royal couple, Queen Caroline and Murat, a few years later it becomes the scandal at the Paris Salon. But just give it a few more years and it essentially establishes a new acceptable format to portray the female nude, and not just for private commissions, but for public consumption. So let's turn back to portraiture for one final example and see how and where these ideas of mannerist distortion are actually present in these portraits, which at first seem so realistic. This is a late portrait. Ingres is now in his 60s, and he's depicting the young Comtesse d'Ausenville, or the Princess Broly. And if we compare his initial sketches with the final drawing, we see how much has actually been manipulated along the way. In the initial drawing, a sketch made from life, we get much more of the nuance of the human figure, and when we compare that later to the final painting, we recognize immediately how idealized into these perfect geometries the human figure has been conformed into. This is especially noticeable in her face, which in the drawing is oval and almost impossibly round in the painting. He's such a master at this point in his career. This is all so subtle that we barely recognize what he's done. If we compare Ingres' portraits with a luminous Madonna by Raphael, we can find parallels between the idealization through the use of harmonious geometries in the human figure and throughout the composition. And yet, if we put it next to one of Bronzino's figures, we can also find parallels between the stylization, the elongation, the exaggeration of certain parts of the human anatomy. So how did he go from being criticized for all of these different characteristics to becoming the darling of the Academy? Well, the story changed in 1824, and so in the 1820s there's this split in the Academy. Neoclassicism is declining, and you have the young romantics, which seem to be taking the place over. And so in 1824, Ingres shows the painting, The Vow of Louis XIII, and it's this epic, historical history painting with religious overtones of the king swearing his allegiance to the Madonna and Child, and it is an epic, grand, neoclassical painting, received with huge accolades. And with this, Ingres secures his position as the leading neoclassicist at the Academy. As we move forward, we'll see the Academy itself is threatened as we transition away from the traditional and the academic into the modern. And yet, even in the modern age, with all of its change, Ingres has secured his legacy. We'll see how in a couple of weeks.
Um, Yeah, it's good. I like the way she relates what he was doing to the tradition. It's informative, I thought. So let's watch this. Any further comments on Ingres before we want to show that Ukrainian art? Any comments? Anybody want to say anything?
No, thank you.
All right. So we've covered just a quick review here. We've covered most of the I think all the major periods, and I haven't gone into much detail on what's Impressionism or Post-Impressionism, and I think I'll do a few of the like Manet and a few of the others coming week, and just to lead up to the modern period, and then probably we'll do some more modern painters.
Can you do some on Pissarro?
Yeah, I could do Pissarro.
He's an interesting, and so is Cézanne and Gauguin.
I already did Cézanne, didn't I? I think I did Cézanne, but Gauguin, yeah.
And Modigliani, one of the things I did want to say is there were a couple paintings that Ingres did that looked a lot like Modigliani, the long neck.
Yeah, right, exactly. I think Modigliani must have been influenced. Yeah, because then he just took it to the next level of distortion. I think this is the one. My Ukrainian Journey.
Ну, такі мами тут теж.
Start here. When did he do this? Early April. It's like he just posted it.
This is Lviv. It's about 50 miles from the Polish border. And I've come here to find out about Ukrainian art.
It's the city got bombed last night.
And to see if it's still safe after recent events. And also to see what it tells us about these brave and remarkable people. Now, before the Second World War, these were also Polish lands. My parents were born not far from here. So the art of the city and the fate of the people, they're personal for me. So I'm in the National Museum in Lviv, and I've come to the director's office director's on the phone at the moment, but he's going to talk to us about what's happening here in the museums in Ukraine and also show us around this fantastic collection here. Of course, a lot of it's had to be taken down. It's all being protected. But here he is, the director.
General Director.
General Director, thank you, of the National Museums here in Ukraine and in Lviv. Taras Woźniak.
Tak.
No, so you speak perfect English.
Nie. Lepiej po polsku.
All right. He prefers to speak in Polish, but I know one thing about you. Jedną rzecz wiem o panu, że pan właśnie ogląda moje filmy gdzieś. He's seen my films somewhere, so.
Tak, rzeczywiście. Ja nawet nie pamiętam na jakim z kanalu, w jakiej telewizji, ale to było znakomicie, przynajmniej dla mnie, dynamicznie, jakoś tak. Odpowiada temperamentu już południowemu,
No.
nie brytyjskiemu.
Zaraz poznać, że to Polak, prawda?
No od razu. Nawet nie po nazwisku.
No, dziękuję. No, przyjechaliśmy tu się dowiedzieć, co się właściwie dzieje w kraju, w Ukrainie, jeśli chodzi o sztuce. Co musieliście zrobić, co musieliście zmienić tu?
No, muzea nie są głównym celem teraz dla tych okupantów rosyjskich, ale niemniej w sytuacji, kiedy rujnuje się miasto, tak jak Mariupol, gdzie zrujnowało około 90% już miasta, muzea, teatry, etc. też pod zagrożeniem. Mamy specjalne regulacje swoje. Te regulacje nie powstały bukvalnie teraz, jak zaczęła się wojna, bo wojna w Ukrainie trwała od XIV wieku, od XIV roku, ale z drugiej strony mamy te regulacje i według tych instrukcji szykujemy się do tego, może do ewakuacji, jeżeli chodzi o muzea na wschodzie, albo do tego, żeby jakoś ubezpieczyć swoje te zbiory, jeżeli chodzi o te muzea, które na razie są na zachodzie. Mało tego, przejmujemy te część przynajmniej tych kolekcji, tych zbiorów, jakie były w muzeach na wschodzie, żeby one były ubezpieczone od tych działań wojskowych.
To z Kijowa tu macie też sztukę, z Charkiwa.
I z Kijowa, i z Charkowa, i z Dniepra, i z Zaporoża, etc.
Wszystko do Lwowa przyszło, do
No
Lwiwa.
nie tylko do Lwowa, ja myślę, że i do innych miast też.
A co wy w tym muzeum macie? Wiesz, to jest ogromna kolekcja, ale jakie rzeczy na przykład, jakie obrazy wy macie tu?
No, najważniejsze rzeczy to te, jakie związane z naszym regionem i z tym, że to nie takie mało miasteczkowe działa. Najważniejsze to jest kolekcja rzeźb Jana Jerzy Pinzla, rzeźbiarza XVIII wieku, wysokie barokko, takie późne barokko, no, poziom absolutnie światowy. Drugie to mamy takie poszczególne perełki, jak powiedzmy obraz Georgesa de la Toura, czy José Ribera, czy też
Tycjana macie.
I Tycjana, i Francisco Goya, ale też te najważniejsze, jakie my przeliczyliśmy i plus jeszcze rzeczy teraz już zachowane do tych magazynów i ubezpieczone tak jakby w pierwszym rzędzie.
Co my nie możemy zobaczyć?
No niestety teraz nie. Po wojnie to zapraszam.
Dziękuję, no wrócimy jak najszybciej. Widzę, że pan ma tu takie interesujące obrazy i rzeczy tu właśnie w swoim biurze. To mnie interesowało, ten obraz tu. Czy mogę podnieść?
Proszę.
Co pan o tym może powiedzieć? No zaraz pokażemy tam do kamery.
No to wojna, która w jakimś sensie jest taką ilustracją tego, co się odbywało i odbywa na Kaukazie, ale też i w Ukrainie. To w czasach wojny Szamila, znanego lidera czeczeńskiego jeszcze w XIX wieku, to taki żołnierz czeczeński z głową żołnierza rosyjskiego. W jakimś sensie to ilustruje nasze czasy, też co odbywa w Ukrainie dzisiaj. Jasne, że nie w taki barbarzyński oto sposób, ale i też barbarzyński sposób też, bo kiedy giną dzieci, około 200 dzieci już jest zabito prosto, czy tysiące mieszkańców, no to wygląda plus minus tak. I dlatego ten obraz jakby ja wyciągnąłem z tych magazynów i tak oglądam periodycznie. Może ze smutkiem, a może i nie.
No. Przypomina właśnie tą historię tych regionów Bo tam ludzie
No
na
tak,
przykład
tu
w Anglii,
cała- tu cała
w Anglii
historia.
ludzie nie wiedzą, co się tu się stało, nie? W historycznych czasach. Ale tu zawsze były takie bitwy, zawsze problemy, prawda? Zawsze coś się działało.
No, jesteśmy, no, i Polska, i Ukraina to takie jak korytarz w Europie, przez jaki chodzą wojska. To niemieckie tam z powrotem, to rosyjskie tam i z powrotem. I dlatego zawsze jesteśmy takimi ofiarami tej całej, tych dziejów europejskich.
Prawda, taka autostrada. No,
Tak.
czy może nam pan teraz pokazać coś tam poza muzeum, co tam wisi, co zostało? Pójdziemy na taką krótką turę?
Tak, proszę.
No, to idziemy.
Zapraszam.
A tylko nie biorę to ze sobą, zostawiam panu. Bo wiem, że pan lubi oglądać.
Tak.
Czyli idziemy.
Dobra.
Idziemy. So the director's taking us through the museum, and most of the work has gone off the walls, but for security reasons, we can't really show it all, which is a shame because even in the dark you can see these are beautiful spaces. So these are some of the rooms where the great paintings they have in the collection used to hang. But everything, of course, is now in secure storage. So these fantastic rooms have very little on show. It's quite ghostly going through the palace now.
Zaraz włączę. No właśnie tutaj wisiał Titian.
This is the space where the Titian used to hang. The portrait of Antonio Grimani.
Tak, to możemy iść dalej. Dobra.
To jaki na przykład w tym muzeum, jaki jest najsłynniejszy obraz? Chyba ten Georges de la Tour.
No właśnie tutaj był ten obraz Georgesa de la Toura u lichwiarza, chociaż z drugiej strony mamy dyskusję co do tego, jaki tam siużet był. No teraz on jest w magazynach zdjęty, no i niestety chyba po wojnie można będzie go oglądać.
No, zawsze chciałem ten obraz właśnie przyjechać odwiedzić, dlatego że de la Toura uwielbiam.
No chyba to najlepsze, co jest w naszym muzeum w ogóle.
No a jaki duży jest? Jak na przykład tu widzimy pustą ścianę.
Nie, no plus minus taki. Plus tak.
So this is where the big Georges de la Tour used to hang. See, it's a big painting. And it's
Let's look at that, since it's their most famous painting. Images.
Joe, can you ask everybody to mute, please?
You heard that? Someone had their phone on. The tour, the money changer. Oops. Parents, super paramount, parents attack the money. I think it must be this one. So,
Joe, did you mean to stop right there?
I just wanted to see the painting that he's talking about. I'll go back. Let's crop a picture of it. Must be this one. I gotta go here it is. Payment of dues must be similar.
I thought it was the money changers in the temple.
No,
You know, where a
right,
bunch of people are, there's a,
right.
maybe wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what I'm saying. So anyway, he lived 1593 to 1652, so late Renaissance. Okay.
I have to say, it's one of the paintings I always really wanted to see. And the general director's given me a catalogue with it in. So it's this, the money changers it's called, isn't it? A co to właściwie się dzieje w tym obrazie?
No, niby wymiana jakichś pieniędzy. No praktycznie nikt nie wie.
No to interesujący artysta, dlatego że przez wiele lat był zapomniany, nie? Nigdy nikt nie mówił o Georges de la Tour. Jakoś historia jego zapomniała, że
No
on
tak,
w ogóle
to tak
był.
było, a Vivaldi też był zapomniany.
Tak,
Był
tak.
nikomu niepotrzebny, a teraz słynny Vivaldi, tak samo jak i de la Tour. No,
Albo Vermeer.
zmieniają się, albo Vermeer też. W jakimś czasie się uważa za jakiegoś coś nieważnego, a potem się okazuje, że jednak nie tak.
Mam nadzieję, że niedługo wróci, panie dyrektorze.
Wróci.
Chcemy koniecznie oglądać.
Just then, an air raid siren goes off, and the director disappears downstairs to check it out. No one seems too worried about it, so we take a short stroll through the streets of Lviv, past the humanitarian center next door, where Western aid is being distributed,
Last night, there were 3 missiles that hit the city.
past loads and loads of sandbags, to his second museum, the one filled with Polish and Ukrainian art.
Łaziński Palace.
Myśmy tam przynieśli parę obrazów dla was, a potem zobaczycie cały zestaw. Tam.
A co to za alarm jakiś słyszałem?
Znaczy rakiety lecą. Rakiety albo samoloty lecą.
No. To z Polski?
Tak, z Poznania.
Polish bubble wrap from Poznań.
To filmować można.
This is another painting I really wanted to see, and thank you to the director for taking us down here to see it. It's by Wojciech Kosak, and it's a painting about the Napoleonic Wars, but not the Napoleonic Wars that we usually hear about in Britain, at least not from the same side. So this is, as it were, a painting from the Napoleonic side of the argument. Co właściwie tu widzimy przed sobą i kiedy ten obraz był malowany, panie
No
dyrektorze?
to XIX wiek, właśnie ta cała kampania w XII roku, kiedy Napoleon szedł na Moskwę i tutaj wraca. No to taki obrazek wojny, która ma takie czasem niezbyt przyjemną twarz. No i w końcu plus minus w jakimś sensie to wyglądało w lutym i na wschodniej Ukrainie plus minus tak samo.
No, czyli...
Tylko że czołgi zamiast koni.
Prawda? Interesująca rzecz dla nas, bo w Wielkiej Brytanii wszyscy zapomnieli, wydaje mi się, że w czasie tych napoleońskich, że Polacy właściwie bili się na tej samej stronie co Francuzi. Czyli
No tak, legiony polskie były w wojsku wielkiej armii Napoleona i walczyli na różnych terytoriach, też i w Rosji.
Dlaczego?
Dlatego, żeby zdobyć wolność i niepodległość Polski.
Właśnie o to chodzi, nie? Że zawsze w tych częściach Europy zawsze ludzie muszą się bić i szukać wolności.
Teraz Ukraina jest w tej sytuacji, w jakiej była Polska w 1939 roku, jaka była z kraju plus minus ucywilizowanego świata, między dwóch dyktatorów Hitlera i Stalina. Teraz Ukraina przed jednym, ale może i przed dwoma, bo Łukaszenko z Białorusią to też drugi jeszcze, zaborca, który urządził wojnę tutaj w Ukrainie.
Nic się nie zmienia.
Niestety.
No, dziękuję. Idziemy dalej. So I've just found out that they've actually opened the museum to 2 Ukrainian artists who I think were based in Kiev before. They've come here not only to show at the museum, but they're also staying here. So this is their kind of temporary accommodation. They're very well known in Ukraine, Volodymyr Budnikov and Władar Rilka. So let's go in and meet them. Panie, przepraszam. So Mr. Waldemar Januszczak, Władar, dziękuję za spotkanie. So here we are, these 2 artists who've traveled from Kiev? From Kiev. Yeah.
Near months ago.
A month ago. So before, just at the beginning of the invasion.
Beginning.
No. It was 1st of March, I think. Yeah.
And
you
go
we
from
left Kiev.
Yeah.
It was a long way because we changed 3 trains. We didn't want to leave Kiev.
Now you're living in the museum.
Yes, really, but here, after our exhibitions here, it is our second home.
Yeah. So have you've been working? So while you're here, yes? Show me your work, Vadim.
You know, it's amazing how many Ukrainians speak English. It's they must all be taught in school.
She's
Come
delightful.
on. You've been really busy.
Say that?
I just thought that she came across as very delightful person.
Oh yeah.
So much.
It's Syria, time of the war.
Time of the war.
Yes, it's all. I do it when we live here.
Shall I hold it up? Let me give me one, and I'll hold it up. So this is a Russian plane.
Yes.
Bombing the.
Yes, bombing.
What's interesting, Volodymyr, is that you were abstract artist, but when the war comes, your work becomes more figurative.
Because this was so, for me, dangerous, and I try to do it in a figurative style. It's Russian, They not people, they not, they died people. All Russian is died people. They come here and if not Ukraine, they go to Europe, they go to all world and try to destroy it all. It's,
not all Russians, but Putin's Russians.
Putin, of course, but you understand, because Putin before war have 40% popular. After he killed many people, in Russian he's popular near 90%.
It's Russians.
Yeah.
It's not
Only Putin. We'll put them down. So you've been very busy. Now let's see what you've been doing.
I made a lot of drawings, and in the beginning of this part of war, this hot part of war, because war is 8 years.
Yes, since Crimea. So tell us about these images. What's this? What's
For example, this is about Red Cross, and this is about the activity in Rostov.
There's a little bit of Francis Bacon.
Yes, I love him.
It's like a screaming figure. Yeah. And these images of kind of femininity or suffering.
It is not about femininity. It is not about women in war, and it's just about human body in war.
So you mean like the way the human body is attacked, or?
I have no right words for this war, and this is my language now.
It's a very powerful language.
Outside in Lviv, the statues have been wrapped and the windows have been boarded up. And the great opera house here has been turned into a heroic poster site, filled with stirring images. This hero on the right is the so-called Ghost of Kiev, a legendary fighter pilot said to have brought down 48 Russian planes. Everywhere you go, you see the Ukrainian flag, blue and yellow. Such a striking image. And according to one legend, it's based on the landscapes around here, the blue sky and the yellow corn. It's such an optimistic and beautiful idea, so full of hope and innocence. Such a simple but brilliant bit of design, really catchy.
And I think it's played an important role, not just in rousing the Ukrainian people, but in rousing everybody else as well. And I think it also proves how important art issues can be, even in a time of war. When I met Taras Wozniak, the general director of Lviv's museums, I pretended I knew a lot about Johann Georg Pinsel, the great Baroque sculptor. But actually, I don't. So it was time to find out.
Muzej Pinsel? Można wejść?
A, dziękuję, dziękuję. So this is a museum devoted to Johann Georg Pinsel, who was an artist working in Ukraine, Lviv at the time. And this is the director of the museum, pani Lesia, and she's going to tell us all about this place. Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry panu.
Ten muzeum jest właśnie tego Pinsela, sztuka Pinsela, tak? Co wy tu macie w tym muzeum?
Ну, в цьому музеї зібрано, скажімо, майже вся спадщина цього талановитого скульптора. Тобто більше Пінзеля, як такого, практично в інших музеях немає, можливо, за якимись одинокими випадками. Але оцей музей представляє цю творчість цього геніального скульптора у всій повноті своїй.
A Pinsel pracował cały czas w Ukrainie, w Lwowie tylko, czy gdzie?
Ні, не тільки у Львові, але в основному це тут. Практично 90% того, що ми маємо в наявності.
No bo w Wielkiej Brytanii, czy we Francji, we Włoszech, to się nie słyszy dużo o tym Pinselu.
Для, скажімо так, для Європи Пінзель став відкриттям на початку ХХ століття. До того про Пінзеля ніхто не знав і не чув у Європі.
A to styl jego rzeźby to jest taki barocki, tak?
То є експресивне бароко.
Експресивне.
Експресивне бароко. Це такий цілий напрямок барокової пластиці. Пінзель вирізняється серед всієї групи барокових майстрів епохи бароко, так? Своєю такою унікальною різьбою, експресивною, динамічною, дуже такою чуттєвою, дуже такою глибокою, в емоційному плані. Експресія Пінзеля є фантастична. І його недаремно називають останнім великим скульптором doby baroko.
I to wszystko jest teraz schowane, te rzeźby. Możemy coś zobaczyć?
Ви можете побачити те, що ми маємо в себе там сховане. Так.
To pójdziemy, zobaczymy?
Tak, proszę.
Dziękuję. To kościół był przedtem, tak?
Так, то є костел Кларисок, сестер Кларисок, так, то є Бернандини.
Barokowy.
Пінзель потребує великого простору, Пінзель потребує оцього об'єму.
Atmosferę.
Атмосфери, так.
No, piękna atmosfera, piękna. I pasuje.
Так. Ну то прошу, щоб ви зрозуміли, то не є приміщення для зберігання, то є кабінет.
Так.
Але оскільки ми не маємо тут таких фондових приміщень, то ми дещо могли сюди забрати до нашого кабінету.
No widać właśnie.
Так, то є, власне, обережно, бо то є завернуте, то одне крило від ангела, а то є наш Авраам. Так?
Abraham, tak?
Абрагам, то є жертвоприношення Авраама. Друга фігура до тої є, це є його син Ісаак.
Piękna, piękna.
То є два...
Abraham, a to jest Isaac, tak?
Так. То є дві фігури, які створюють єдину композицію, щоб ви розуміли.
To on ma w ręku
Він має
nóż.
меч у нас лежить там окремо, тому що ми зняли його від цієї пластики. Ну, то єдина скульптура, яку ми можемо вам показати.
Dziękuję.
Тому що Самсон, наприклад, фігура парна до нього, то вона в нас є на залі, але вона є загорнута, так?
Jedno jest pewne, że ten Pinsel to rzeczywiście był specjalnym takim rzeźbiarzem. To fantastyczna praca.
Так, то є фантастично. Ну, подивіться, бачите, ну тут ми, якщо ми дивитися на ці скульптури, ви ж самі відчуваєте, наскільки вони ці речі є експресивні, так? Наскільки вони є такі динамічні. А по силі, так би мовити, передачі внутрішнього стану, так? В пінзелівській пластиці взагалі рівних немає. Вони дуже емоційні.
No mam nadzieję, że w przyszłości będziemy wszyscy słyszeli więcej o nim. Dziękuję bardzo za wizytę, panie dyrektorze, dziękuję naprawdę.
Taras Woźniak has changed his mind. I can go and see some of the museum's stores. It's an hour and a half drive out of Lviv on a rural road. And for old time's sake, I catch a lift some of the way on a passing horse and cart. Hejta, Vishta, Vio.
Andrzej, dziękuję, dziękuję. Pani Lesio, no. So they've taken me out to this monastery somewhere on the outskirts of Lviv. I'm not 100% sure where it is, and of course they're keeping it a bit secret, but it sounds like an amazing place. And from what I hear, it's absolutely packed with some of the Ukrainian art that's being preserved here, saved here. And this is Pani Lesia, and she's going to show us around. Dzień dobry, Pani Lesiu.
Dzień dobry dla
Dzień
państwa.
dobry. To fantastyczne miejsce.
Fantastyczne. To jest takie, no, bardzo cudowne miejsce, bo tutaj urodził się król polski Jan III Sobieski, to w tej twierdzy, że tam na górę, tak. No,
Jan Sobieski się tam urodził.
Tak, w tym zamku, w tej twierdzy.
Wszystko,
A
tak?
tutaj jest magazyny, które, no, mają wielkie bogactwa. Tutaj jest 2500 skulptur drewnianych. Tutaj około 1500 ikony starej, dawnej ukraińskiej. No, mnogo różnych, wiele różnych przekrasnych utworzeń.
Pani Lesiu, pokażcie te bogactwo.
Proszę.
Pokażcie mi te bogactwo.
Proszę, wchodzimy. Te pierwsze piętro. Te pierwsze piętro to jest zbiór naszej dawniej ukraińskiej ikony końca no, XVI do XVIII wieku wkljuczny.
No.
Proszę.
Niech pani idzie ze mną.
Proszę.
So these are Polish and Ukrainian icons.
No, z różnych miast pochodzi, tutaj zachodniej Ukrainy. No, były czasy ateistyczne. Tak, i wszyscy cerkwi byli zamknięte, w kościołach powsюди rozmieszczali jakieś składy tam i to wszystko, co się udało zachować, no, тут зберігається.
To czyli jak to były czasy sowieckie, tak?
Tak.
To wszystko chcieli zburzyć, wyrzucić.
Так, все хотіли повикидати з церков, а от, власне, працівники галереї образів Львовської і різних інших музеїв львовських їздили по заходніх областях України, і то все, що можна було, то все сюди звозили. І так у нас є велика колекція, около 1500.
1500?
Tak.
Tych starych ikonów?
Tak.
I jakie daty pani mi powiedziała?
XVI wiek, XVII, XVIII.
I wszystko chcieli wyrzucić, tak? Sowieci.
Tak, to główna przyczyna. I tu jeszcze krucyfiksy, proszę pooglądać, bardzo piękna kolekcja, zbiór. Od najstarszych do początku XX wieku. No i jeszcze...
To najstarsze tu?
Tak, tutaj, z tego
I tutaj
kraju.
te nowsze.
No bo wszystko to wyrzucali z chramów. Mówią, że tutaj chodzi takie...
Duch?
Duch taki, takiego Jana Kaspara, więc on się nazywał Jan Kaspar. No takie mamy tu pierwsze piętro. Widzicie, bardzo piękna kolekcja krucyfiksów. Tak.
ruszam za próg, a mamciu taska nie Bóg. Bo gdzie jeszcze ludziom tak dobrze jak tu, tylko we Lwowie, gdzie pięścią się budzą i tulą do snu.
So what have I learnt? Well, a lot really. That the people here are brave and charming. That they care deeply about their art and about looking after it. And that they're so brave that sometimes they laugh in the face of death. And I've learnt that Lviv is a beautiful and culturally rich city. And that as soon as this terrible war is over, I want to come back here and to see it properly, the way it should be seen.
Gdzie jeszcze ludziom tak dobrze jak tu, tylko we Lwowie, gdzie pieśnią się budzą i tulą do snu. Na Łyszakowie, czy Boga, czy dziad, to są za brat i każdy ma uśmiech na twarzy jak my, a panny to ma złociutki ten drut. Jak stąd? Czekolada. Więc gdyby miał wierzyć, urodzi się znów, to tylko we Lwowie. I szkoda gadania i to też komu nie ma jak Lwów.
Wow, that was.
Thank you, Joe. That was fabulous. Oh, God bless you, Joe.
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna make
Amazing.
me cry.
It makes you sad.
Yeah.
That shows more reality than anything I've seen on TV about what's really going on.